Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those who are the first time here, my name is Zach. I'm 22 years old Russian who left Russia because of the war against Ukraine. And in today's video, we're going to be discussing retired people and their opinion on the war against Ukraine. Most of the anti-war minded people like myself in Russia used to think that the elder people, they do support the war, they do support Putin, and they are the majority who support Putin. However, there are still a lot of retired people in Russia who oppose Putin's aggression against Ukraine. And about them, I'm gonna tell you in this video today. This is such a common narrative of the Russian propaganda that the majority of Russians, they do support the war, and especially elder people, that already one day after the war started on 24th of February 2022, and already one day after, 25th February of 2022, they already started to ask people, to call people with all those sociological polls and asking what do they think about the war and what do they think about Putin. And those are the results by one of those governmental organizations which is called the Opinion of the Society. And by the way, it is owned and ruled by one of the Putin's friends who used to be a member of Putin's electoral headquarters in 1999, Alexander Anatolievich Oslan. And here's what his organization say about opinion of elder people in Russia on the war. 77% of respondents answered that they support the beginning of the special military operation. 83 of the respondents over the age of 60 also said that they positively assess Putin's work as a president. And to be honest, while I was living in Russia, I felt like this. Or at least I was feeling the majority of Russians, not 77% that they say here, because I know some of the anti-war minded people and some of the anti-Putin minded people who were anti-Putin for more than 15 years. But still, the majority of elder people in Russia, they do support the war. And one of the main reasons for this is because of the source of their information. The majority of elder people in Russia, they do not use the internet. And they do not get any other point of view except of the governmental one, because all of the TV channels that they watch, all of the newspapers that they read are owned by the government. I myself had a great-grandmother, and when I was visiting her in my hometown in Komsomolsk-on-Amur, we would always argue about politics. I would always criticize Putin, and she would always try to defend Putin. And she would basically repeat all the takes the Russian TV propaganda has been stating and has been saying for her for a lot of years. And eventually, because of me giving her another perspective, which I've learned from the internet, not from the official governmental resources, my grandma would start feeling bad. Her heart rate would go up, her blood pressure would go up, and eventually at some points my relatives just prohibited me to talk to her about politics. And unfortunately, after the war started, we kind of stopped talking to each other because I've left Russia and it was impossible for her to call me outside of Russia since she doesn't have the internet. And eventually I could not speak to my great-grandmother all the way until she passed away in June 2022. And eventually, since the beginning of the war, we didn't really have a chance to discuss and to tell her all the opinions, all the facts I know about the war and why it is unjust. But unfortunately she passed away and I wasn't able to make it to her funeral, and I really feel bad about it because I was outside of Russia. For me it was dangerous to come back. But coming back to the majority of retired people of Russia, still there is a big group of people who oppose the war, and I'm gonna tell you about them today. According to the human rights organization OVD-Info, about 20,000 people were either fined or arrested for their anti-war position since the beginning of the war. And at least 700 felony cases were started on people for their anti-war position. For at least 240 retired people, the criminal cases were started, and 50 of those criminal cases are felonies. Lawyers of those retirees say that the real number can be way higher because the government is trying to hide it, and all of those cases we know are the ones that were kind of told to us by the media, not by the government. One of the lawyers said, "There is a stereotype that only young people protest against the war. They really make up the majority, but at the same time there are more elderly people who are persecuted in connection with the anti-war position than you might think. Retired people protested with banners, they drew anti-war graffitis, they gave different agitational papers against the war, and the police would arrest even those people who are elder than 70 years old." And of course, the retired people were trying to set enlistment offices on fire, which is in my opinion one of the most effective ways of protesting in nowadays Russia. And now let me tell you about those cases of arrested retired people for their anti-war position. In December 2022, police arrested a couple of retired people for trying to put an enlistment office on fire. A couple of 70 years old Alexander Asokhin and his 76 years old wife Maria Medvedeva tried to arson the enlistment office. The man moistened a rack with a gasoline and set the fire to the local commissariat. His wife was videotaping at the moment. On January 24, 2023, the court decided to send Asokhin to compulsory psychiatric treatment. At the moment, the retiree is free and does not want to communicate with journalists. Another case of a 77-year-old citizen of Lenin Oblast, which is not far from St. Petersburg. On August 2, 2023, a 77-year-old resident of the Vsevolozhsky district of the Leningrad region was detained in the unsuccessful attempt to set fire to the local military enlistment office. The pensioner was released from the police department with an obligation to appear, and the next day journalists reported his suicide. In Yekaterinburg, in the summer of 2022, 80-year-old Galina Bastrygina, together with her 79-year-old friend, distributed papers calling for peace, and went to anti-war picket 3 times, for which she was fined for a total of 85,000 rubles. And you may say 85,000 rubles is not that much of a money. However, I'm pretty sure that this 85,000 rubles is the income of Galina for 3 months. And the reasons for this because the pensions in Russia are extremely low. Sitting on the couch is a shame. You still need to express your opinion, Bastrygina said. Galina Bastrygina was famous in Russia for supporting the political prisoners even before the war. 22nd of September 2022, during mobilization in Russia, Galina Bastrygina was again arrested in Yekaterinburg and fined for 300,000 rubles, which is a lot of money. But thanks God and thanks to everyone who participated in this, basically the society, the anti-war activists, they helped her to fundraise the money and to pay the fine. In Borovsk, in Kaluzhskaya Oblast, an 85-year-old Vladimir Ovchinnikov was twice arrested and fined for his anti-war graffitis. He, as an artist, was really famous in his region for a lot of art related to political commentary and especially to Stalin's oppressions in the USSR. In the city of Borovsk, there was even a gallery. A whole street gallery dedicated to the victims of Stalin's repressions has appeared in Borovsk. I'm trying to stay alive, not to go to jail. I speak Aesopian language. I walk somewhere along the edge, on a cliff. I try not to fall. That's what Vladimir Alexandrovich is telling about himself and the political oppression he is facing by the government for opposing the war and calling oppressions of Stalin to ordinary people. But my favorite anti-war artist among elder people is Elena Osipova from St. Petersburg, from the cultural capital of Russia. Elena Osipova has been through the St. Petersburg's blockade by the Nazi Germany during the Second World War, and she knows what Nazism is. And when she sees Nazism, she's calling it. And that's what she started to do after firstly Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, and of course after the full-scale invasion started in 2022. On January 31st, 2023, an exhibition with the artist's work opened in St. Petersburg, but the next day the security forces came there and took everything away. On August 4th, the city court once again refused to file a complaint against the seizure of paintings. While during to all of this trauma and psychological stress, Yelena Osipova had a heart stroke. But she rehabilitated, she recovered, and eventually she went out to one of the new protests of hers, and she said that Russia needs rehabilitation after a serious illness. And by this illness, Yelena Osipova is calling Russian militarism and imperialism. And the thing is that the government cannot really do anything to Yelena Osipova except like different fines, and like arrest for a couple of days or even less than a day because she is 77 and it's kind of dangerous to, they don't want her to die in the police and eventually cause people being not happy with the government. This is why they are trying to fear Yelena Osipova. They are trying to stop Yelena Osipova from showing her anti-war position. This is why, for example, on 9th of May 2022, two young guys, they attacked Yelena Osipova when she was leaving her apartment, and eventually they stole 2 of her paintings with which she was going to go out, and those were the anti-war paintings with the anti-war words. By the way, 6 years ago, Yelena Osipova went to the streets of St. Petersburg with her anti-war art, basically saying that she doesn't support the annexation of Crimea and the war in Syria, and this is how people reacted to it.
чтобы вот это сделать, написать,
Это вы не правы.
дивиденды зарабатывать. Выпить захочет. Смотрите, какая я.
Не согласны, мы не согласны. Это позор вам.
Это вам позор, что вы в своей собственной стране вот это делаете.
Это безобразие, вы не понимаете ничего.
Надо своей страной гордиться. Они вот с этим делают. Это было
Конечно, это вам платили, вы это делаете.
Да. Ты еще
Стыд и срам.
Стыд и срам.
Стыд и срам.
Там делают репортажи, зарабатывают деньги.
The majority of criminal cases about the anti-war opinions are usually started because of the different comments and likes in the social media. It is mostly VK, like analog of Russian Facebook, and Одноклассники, mostly famous among elder people. Approximately 50% of all the misdemeanors for discrediting the Russian military are the cases for different comments and likes on social medias. For fakes about the Russian military was arrested, for example, the 62-year-old Mikhail Semyonov, and he was sentenced for 7 years in jail for comments in the social media. Also, a 67-year-old Tahir Al-Salanov was also sentenced for 3 years of jail for calling to protests in the social medias. According to Tahir Al-Salanov, he left comments on social networks out of a sense of concern for one of his daughters. My daughter lives in Kiev. When they started bombing them, I just lost my mind. I started to write anti-war comments. My child spent the night in a bomber shelter. Do you understand? Explained Arslanov. At the trial, he also admitted his guilt, agreeing that he could overstep the bounds in his expressions. Usually, for writing at least one comment in the social media discrediting the Russian military, you're going to be fined all the way from 15,000 of rubles to 30,000 of rubles. And believe me, this is a lot of money, because, for example, these are the money of my grandmother for 2 months, her monthly income from the pension. For policemen, it's often awkward to start a criminal case on retired people because of the basically comments in the social media saying that there should be no war. And this is why they are trying just to talk to the people, just to talk to those retirees and explain that they should not express their opinion, otherwise police would need to do something else. One of the lawyers who helped retirees said, if the violator has a firm position and he is not going to be silent, a protocol is drawn up. It cannot be said that the authorities have a goal to put all the retirees in jail. When passing sentence, the court takes into account the age of the accused, his state of health, and his financial situation. These factors can also affect the measure of restraint. Elder people rarely ask help from lawyers. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Well, firstly, lawyers are really expensive, and most of the elder people just do not have money to cover the lawyers' expenses. And I'm glad there are some organizations right now among anti-war activists who help people who are oppressed by the government to pay for the lawyers. But some elder people do not even know about the existence of those lawyers because they do not use the internet. And sometimes those elder people even think that the lawyer can bring more bad than good. One of the volunteers of the Human Rights Project over the info said, repressions affects the elderly even more because of less support, financial situations, and diseases. Some elderly people are afraid to cooperate with us, and they believe that with our participation, the chances to sit in jail is even higher. In 2022, a 75-year-old retiree from Bashkortostan, the village of Iglina, was arrested for leaving a comment about on the social media discrediting the Russian military, and eventually he was fined for about 30,000 of rubles. But later, he didn't really stop publishing, and eventually after that they started a felony case on him. And the only reason why they started a felony case on him because Zainul Gadjiev were criticizing those Wagners who were going to fight against Ukraine, the convicts, and he did not praise the dead Wagners whose bodies were transported back to Russia. This is what he said about this. They make posts about them as heroes, but they are not heroes, but only criminals and occupiers. And Zainul has a pretty decent pension, which is actually 25,000 of rubles, and eventually he will be able to pay off his fine in 7 months if he's going to be spending all the money from his pension to pay off the fine. 3rd of October 2023, another felony case was started on Konstantin Seleznev for fakes about the Russian army. The man's apartment was searched, the police took him to the police department, and all of this for just 2 posts on the social medias, and both of them in VK. The first one where he basically retold the investigation of the New York Times about the criminal crimes Russian soldiers committed in Bucha, and the second post where he is kind of addressing the president of Russia, Putin, and he is saying Vladimir Putin as the head of the terrorist country. And eventually police arrested him, but Konstantin Seleznyov, he had problems with his health. And eventually he cannot really be in jail, or otherwise he gonna die pretty soon, because all of those jails are known for extremely poor healthcare services. Even on the way to the court, he lost his conscience and almost died, but they still got him to the court, so the court would decide what do they do with him. Another case from Kemerovo Oblast about one of the miners, Oleg Tyryshkin, who basically do not even remember what comments did he left on the social medias. What comments were those criticizing this or that, he doesn't even remember. But the General Administration for Combating Extremism reminded him. And basically this organization is just looking through the internet, looking for social media's posts, comments, likes, and they say what is extremism and what is not. And as I guess you understand, Russian state calls extremism literally everything. They call extremism what is not really appropriate for the Russian government. You criticizing the war, you are an extremist, terrorist, I don't know, enemy of the state. And so this extremism searching center, they eventually found a couple of comments from God knows how many years ago, and eventually because of that they decided to fine him. And later they even started a felony case. Teryshkin said to the journalists, "They are looking for those comments and other comments. I haven't even written anything for a long time, and they are looking for it and trying to find it little by little. They are specifically winding it all up for a criminal case." First time police went to Teryshkin's apartment in March 2023 after Teryshkin left some comments on social medias criticizing the father of Ramzan Kadyrov, who is the head of Chechnya right now. And eventually a retiree, Oleg Teryshkin, was beaten up by the police. They've started a felony case on him for justifying terrorism. Justifying terrorism for criticizing the father of Ramzan Kadyrov. And they combine in this felony case not only the comments about Kadyrov's father, but also about the Viktor Zolotov, who is the head of Rosgvardia, and about the Russian army in general. Teryshkin said, "This is a sick society in which the authorities are forbidden to criticize. I earned my pension, I worked in the mines, a veteran of labor, and an honorary donor. They shame me." And there is a problem, because if they would start a felony case about, let's say, fakes about the Russian army or discrediting the Russian army, then a lawyer would be able to help him in court. However, because they started this felony case justifying terrorism, even a lawyer cannot take his case. No lawyer can help him. Or another case from Kemerovo, when another retiree left a critical comment about the government and about Putin, and eventually she was fined for 360,000 rubles, and she was sentenced to 1 year of probation. And just think about it, 360,000 rubles, and her pension is only 12,000 rubles. Let's calculate how many months does she need to pay off her fine. 30. 3, 0. She needs 30 months, almost 3 years, to pay off a fine for criticizing the government in the social medias. Crazy. For a lot of retirees, going to jail even for a couple of years is almost like a life term. Because, again, in jails, they do not have good healthcare. A lot of elder people, they have a lot of health issues at the age of like 60, 70 already. And if you go to jail at this age, even for a couple of years, you're basically dead. Nobody gonna care for you in the Russian jails for all of your diseases. One of the lawyers who help retirees said, "Retirees are not the healthiest people, to put it mildly, and they are very worried about such moral pressure." For example, 21st of June 2023, Kaliningrad court sentenced a 64 cancer patient to 7.5 years of jail. Jail for, you guess what? Fakes about the Russian military. They literally sending a person who has cancer, a 64 years old retiree, to jail. And the worst part, that he had mother at that time, and he was caring for his mother. His mother was about 97 years old, And once they arrested him, put him in jail, she died in a couple of months after that. Well, guess why? Because no one was able to take care after her. The chances that he's gonna be never released are pretty high because he had cancer and he's not gonna be treated for cancer in the right way in prison. In the summer of 2023, when conducting a telephone survey, a research group unrelated to the government, Russian field, found that among citizens over 60 years old, only 43% support the escalation of the armed conflict with Ukraine, while 22% oppose it and 35% refrained from answering. And we see if we combine those who refrain from answering and those who oppose the conflict, it's going to be 57% of people who are not the majority of the pro-war minded people. And I think the reason why there are 35% of people who refrain from the answer is because all of those people who are over 60, they were born in the USSR. Some of them still remember Stalin's oppressions of their parents, of their grandparents, maybe even themselves. And that's why they feel like it is not safe to tell their opinion. But at the same time, they are not showing the active support towards the war. So in my opinion, most of those people who refrained are the people who do not support the war. And it gives me the hope about the elder generation in Russian society. Because before learning about that, I was thinking that the majority of Russian pensioners, retirees, they support Putin, they love Putin, they support the war, but there are still a lot of them who have, as we say in Russian, their head on their shoulders. And they are smart people. So it was me, Zach the Russian. As usual, I wish there is going to be peace in Ukraine and freedom in Russia, support the Ukrainian military, support the political refugees. Also, if you want to support my channel, there's going to be links in the description below to Patreon and PayPal. Thank you and see you in the next videos.